I'm going to introduce you to our esteemed panelists. We have Dan Bernardo from Playtra Games. We've seen him before. Come back to the stage, Dan. We have Ruby Kuraishe, who's a BBC Entertainment Commissioner. Honestly, I'm honoured that Ruby's here. Where are you, Ruby? Get to the front. We have Jamie Bartlett. I mean, do I need to really give him an introduction? Yes. All right, I'll give you an introduction. But we also to Jamie Bartlett. Where would you like to sit? Shaking things up already, and that's what happens in the entertainment industry. And then we have Jocelyn Stevenson, who, when I read out the biography, even you'll be just in shock as much as I am. Come along, Jocelyn. I feel like I'm doing a game show. So, get comfortable. So I'm going to go through the biographies first, and then we're going to, well, you're going to get quizzed, basically. That's the plan. So get ready for a game show-like session. So Dan Bernardo, you're from Playtra Games. Originally from Brazil, Dan studied anthropology and graphic design before working as a C-level creative for over 17 years. In 2018, he founded Playtra Games, a London-based development studio specializing in games exploring diverse and unorthodox storytelling. He's an advocate for alternative narrative structures and cultural diversity in games, pretty quickly, becoming one of the most active voices in the indie gaming scene in the UK and giving talks all around the world. Ruby, you are riding high on the critical acclaim and success of just some of your recent commissions, RuPaul's Drag Race UK, The Ranga Nation, and Blind Boy Undestroys the World. You've been an entertainment commissioner for the past 12 years before you were at Channel 4, and in that time you've commissioned so much: factual reality projects, topical satirical comedy, and new talent-led high-concept vehicles. You've overseen many of the BBC's favourite entertainment titles, including Have I Got News for You?, Mock the Week, QI, Never Mind the Buzzcocks, and even Dragon's Den. There's a lot of dragons.
Oh, I wish I'd written this knowing you were going to read it.
Add some more. We can add some more. Don't be shy here. Jamie Bartlett is the best-selling author of The Darknet, Radicals, and The People vs. Tech. Founded the Centre for the Analysis of Social Media at the think tank Demos, and regularly writes on technology and society for The Spectator, The Sunday Times, and elsewhere. You're the presenter of the two-part documentary series, The Secrets of Silicon Valley, and you had a TED Talk about darknet drugs markets, it's easy to say, which has been watched nearly 6 million times. And in 2019, his critically acclaimed BBC podcast series, The Missing Cryptoqueen, reached #1 on the iTunes charts and has been downloaded millions and millions of times. And there's still even more going on, isn't there, with The Missing Cryptoqueen? And Jocelyn Stevenson, you have worked in children's television for over 40 years as a writer, creator, producer, executive producer, and more. Credits, get ready: Sesame Street, Fraggle Rock, Jim Henson's Ghost of Fafnir Hall, Jim Henson's Secret Life of Toys, Pingu, The Hoobs, Bob the Builder, Barney and Friends, Moshi Monsters the Movie, The Magic School Bus, oh my gosh, even more. You were awarded the BAFTA Children's Award Special Award for contribution to children's media in 2015, and you don't just stop. You're currently developing the Waterubers, a global multi-platform mixed media initiative, that's a lot of alliteration, that combines watertight science with an adventure-soaked story. So we're going to have to hear more about that because it just sounds absolutely amazing. Thank you all very much. I've got a big question. Please brace yourself. You're all behind huge entertainment hits. So what's the common thread? What is the common thread here when it comes to tackling those big issues and resonating with an audience? So I'm going to start off with that first. Dan, you're next to me, so.
Oh my God, I feel so out of my league right now. I think what comes behind a big hit, when it talks about diversity, when it talks about social issues, is authenticity. It just comes down to it. Comes down to people who we're talking about lived experiences, but also talk about people in all levels of production that have some understanding of what's going on, what the message is. And I find it very funny when people say this doesn't sell, or this doesn't, there's no commercial appeal in a world with more than 7 billion people. it's very funny for me to think that you can still target a small part of the population or tell a story that resonates strongly with a little piece of the population and generally broadly to the whole population and still feel that you are not viable. So I think having this kind of authentic voices behind the scene and people who are really interested in about the stories they are telling, it just, once it's born, it resonates with people, in my opinion.
I think that's really helpful. Ruby?
You've just said what I was going to say.
I
think the buzzword
Can I work for you?
Yeah, I do. I think the buzzword is authenticity. That's totally what it is. And it's for me, it's just staying really true to representation, real people telling their stories in their way. And the second tier to that the people that are telling those stories understand them. You know, there's empathy there. And we get that, and that's really what will punch through. And of course, you know, to make great entertainment, it has to be really funny. But, you know, we can do that just anyway.
Fantastic. Jamie?
Can someone take a picture? So I don't think I'm ever going to be on a cooler, Untitled panel in my life. I want to make sure it's documented. I don't know if it's the same for everybody, because the sort of journalism I do is sort of quite factual orientated as well. Well, not factual orientated, factual. But certainly for the Missing Cryptoqueen, the thinking about how to give the story a social impact was, we wanted to have this sort of exciting through line, which was basically someone that had gone on the run, that had been on the run for years, running away from the FBI, had stolen as much as 4 billion euros from investors in her fake cryptocurrency. And obviously the idea was that by telling the story, ordinary people would be slightly more cautious about putting all their money in crypto that could vanish, which obviously didn't work very well. But the thinking was, we want to make cryptocurrency engaging, exciting, people can understand it, it makes sense to them, because people switch off on what we felt was a really increasingly important subject for people to understand. So the idea was that by having this through line of someone on the run, and I suppose the authentic part was we're authentically trying to figure out where she is and how she got away with it, and showing how we're doing it and how we're working it out, how we're struggling with it. But through that, branching off onto these really important subject areas. How does money laundering work? How does multi-level marketing work? Why do people get sucked into these investment schemes? And the plan was that by the end, people listening would understand all these worlds that otherwise they would have switched off from, because they were pulled along almost by this exciting sort of dramatic chase for this missing person. And I think it worked. I've had so many people came up to me and said, I actually understand how these investment scams work now. And you like subtly slipped it in while I was hoping you'd find this missing person.
And Jocelyn, does that all resonate in terms of how you've approached things, or?
Absolutely. It's just a different context. I'd say my key words, you say authenticity, I'd say vision. And mostly because, well, Sesame Street and Fraggle Rock in particular, Sesame Street, the vision was, can we educate kids that don't have the advantages of middle-class kids? Can everybody go into school at the same time? It was an amazing vision. Fraggle Rock, Jim Henson said to all of us, I'd like you guys to create a show for kids that'll help stop war. And we all can't, by Thursday, Jim? So it's the vision, and then what you were saying, Jamie, one of the things that's the most fun to do is to take a big idea. We did this on the Magic School Bus, to take a big idea and then find a story vehicle for it. Just like it's just the same thing, as everybody's talking about the same thing. I have to say, I just want to say I'm really honored as a children's industry person to be here, because often we're not included in these discussions. And I'd like to say that we do a lot of this work, because not only for authenticity, we'll take a big vision, but we have to make it work for a 2-year-old. And then, differently, make it work for a 4 to 5-year-old. And then, you know this, Ruby, and then work.
You're at the forefront.
And in a way, yes. So all these things that you're saying resonate. I'm finding this incredibly exciting.
Well, that's great, because I'm going to go straight to you for this one.
Oh, okay.
In that, so keep finding it exciting.
Should have kept my mouth shut.
Now, your work is informed by the conviction that screen-based media can be a powerful influence that simultaneously educates, entertains, and inspires children. you've been behind products that have nurtured not just like one generation, but multiple generations and continue to. So can you elaborate a lot more on what drives you and what keeps you going?
Well, what does drive me is exactly what I just said. I absolutely love getting a big idea and researching it, because research is a big part of what, and not everybody in the industry does that, but this is why it's interesting to be involved with OKRE. Researching it, and then finding the story vehicle for it. And in relation to what somebody said in the last panel, my sort of mantra is goofiness in the service of truth. It's gotta be funny. And you know, what better mentor? Jim Henson was my creative mentor when I first started out. I mean, I learned a lot from him in that, how humor works and how you use it and how you use it authentically. So did that answer the question?
That always answers the question. In fact, I'm going to get a T-shirt now saying
goofiness in the truth. Well, Jim Henson, he used to look at takes, and he'd stand there and look at a take we'd just done, and he'd go, "That's so goofy, it's worthy of us." That was the highest compliment.
Jamie, I mean, goofiness. How
not in your role, not so sure.
How much of a role does that play in terms of what drives you as well? Even with the factual journalism and the sort of quite serious subjects, what does drive you?
Well, I always wanted to, with technology, this is the thing I mainly do, I'm very aware that for so many people it is just completely baffling. Obviously we're at Meta's headquarters, they just don't understand how any of it works, but it has such a huge importance in their lives. And anything you can do to demystify it, to make it sort of make a bit more sense to people is worth the effort. And that's what I've always tried to do. And so often, it won't come as a surprise to anyone, it's through some person's story, some person's experience of it. And oftentimes, I try to come up with a way to explain technology that's quite funny. I mean, in the Cryptoqueen, we had this problem where, I don't want to get into the technicalities of it, but part of cryptocurrency runs on this specialized type of database called a blockchain, or it's all quite boring. But it was really important to try to explain that because the story wouldn't work. And me and the producer are sitting there like, how are we going to explain this? Everyone's going to switch off on episode 2. Because you're obviously thinking people have got to stay listening, and you know all the research about how long before people will turn off, and that's in the back of your mind constantly. So it's like, how do I explain blockchain in a way that people will enjoy? So I had this idea that I'd phone my mum up, who I do this with her all the time, and try to tell her how blockchains work. I didn't warn her at all, I just phoned her up and explained it to her. And I knew what she'd do. I spent sort of 45 seconds talking. I said, "Do you understand?" And she sort of paused, perfect. And she was like, "Nope." And she said, "I don't get it. Well, can you spend Bitcoin in Tesco's then?" And I said, "Well, not really." She said, "Well, what's the point of it then?" I said, "Well, it's this revolution." "No, I don't understand really. You should go back to the drawing board and try again, Jamie." And it was quite embarrassing, but everyone loved it. Everyone was like, "That is exactly like your mum putting you down as well was brilliant." And it helped people listening feel less bad if they didn't understand it either. But it got us over the hump, and it turned a really difficult thing into quite a fun thing. And always looking for just little moments where you can make something a little fun, a little goofy, but funny, but actually gets the point across and demystifies the tech, because the minute you get into the nitty-gritty, people just, their eyes glaze over and you've lost them. And there's so much more that you want to tell them about how it affects the world that's got nothing to do with the specific of the technology. It's about the impact it's having. So that's what, I suppose, what I always tried to do.
Fantastic. Yeah. And Ruby, I mean, who do you phone to sort of get put down by, basically, when it comes to your ideas? But no, what actually does
We can all rely on our mums, can't we?
Yeah.
No, I thought it was quite relatable, though, isn't it? That's what, you know, that's really the nub of that. And maybe that's why we have Ramesh's mum on the Ranga Nation, like keeping him in his place. Yeah, you know, it's how you tell a story, isn't it? Because Blind Boy Destroys the World is deeply factual and has tons and tons of briefs but I'm trying to tell a story to 16 to 23-year-olds that I don't want them switching off. It might be 15,000 words in The Guardian, but for me, I'm trying to do half an hour told in a quite a... And there was a time when Blind Boy is is an Irish satirist, and he puts a plastic bag over his head. So that was already an issue with BBC guidelines. And he often uses a talking cod as part to get his storylines across. But it was then trying to, you know, take all of that and still be factually correct and still get that story across. And that's where entertainment and factual work, isn't it? I think when you're still delivering your story in an entertaining way, that will always have more impact than, oh, this is the long read and I should read it, it's worthy. But it's not going to meet 17-year-old, you know, Javid in Birmingham.
No, you're right. But which brings me on to you, Dan. Where's your talking cod?
Actually, my mom is very tech savvy in a way. So I call her to like how this Facebook thing works, probably more than the other way around. I honestly, when I try to explain something to people, like my background as an anthropologist actually educates a lot of my decisions about storytelling. I love remember one of my teachers saying that we are eating, sleeping, and talking and listening stories machines. Like it's part of integral part of us as humans. We love telling stories. We love like listening to stories. And my point of view when I try to write something, we wrote the story for Great Force, which is 15 hours long. So imagine like a movie with 15 hours. With choices and everything, and I was always thinking, am I furthering whatever is the point that I'm trying to make, but is this something people would spend the time of the day doing? Because there's so much out there, especially when you are doing something specific, like when I try to do something socially aware or something, you know, about mental health or about how do you compete with things that are just fun. No, it's a bit harder for you, especially in things like video games. There's so many out there. So my actually calling card is my friends, my colleagues, and I write something and say, is this something that you find interesting, you find funny? Because if and they're quite brutal to me. They're like, no, this stinks, or like they are really, really sometimes cruel. I would say, I'm talking to you. But it's always a good starting point. We wrote a story about this teenager girl who was bullied by her mother. And we are going to send this to publishers, and they will say, oh, this is very funny, but it's a story about, you know, somebody who's being mentally tortured by somebody from the family. And I said, yeah, there's a story that happens all the time, and I want to pass this to people who are going to play my video game. And the balance of, this is something important, but entertaining is always in my mind. I try to keep entertainment and some, you know, social message together, if I can.
And that's from the very beginning. Like, do you have like a storyboard process, or how do you actually, what do you think about at that very beginning of the process? Like, are you just doodling? What happens?
Yeah, so for me, the example of intersexuality is I'm a black man, I'm South American, I'm gay, my mom is Jewish. So it's like...
Can we throw anything more?
It's very hard to untangle those things. And I was like, what is the issue of the day I want to talk about? Right? And my idea was my sexuality make me try to find family outside my family. And this is something that I really want to talk about. So our games are like, how can we create a journey that teenagers are going to be part of, play, and they will identify themselves. Like what I want to do as a creator, and that's the reason why we made a partnership with It Gets Better, is a charity that just helps teenagers and young adults to know that, you know, things are very bad at you right now. Your family doesn't accept you. You are hated, but things are going to get better. And this is the story of my life. So how to entangle those things. So in the beginning, I was like, okay, I want to tell the story about somebody who's having a very shitty moment right now, but things are going to get better. And how do I entangle this to a real world entity that can get the message and further the reach.
Brilliant. And that actually brings me on to the next question I actually wanted to ask about. everything that you've all been involved with has very much its own identity. Like it's very distinct. It stands out. Even when you've had to adapt formats, perhaps, Ruby, you've got RuPaul's Drag Race UK. It is its own identity. How do you factor that in? How do you make sure that that cuts through, especially as there's so much to compete against and so much, we're not always very resource heavy right now. So how do you get an identity?
So with Drag Race, that's probably quite a good example, but so it was already established. It's on 13 years in the States, and on first look, it's a bunch of 12 queens competing for a title, 12 drag queens. On second look, it's way more than that. It's a show that celebrates LGBTQ plus culture and tells those stories authentically, and it's really funny because they're hilarious characters, and drag is an art form as well, so it's got all of those things. But when I was looking at it, I knew I knew there was an underground appeal, and I didn't want to neutralise that, but I didn't want to do a carbon copy of a US series because it's having an understanding of UK reality, of which I've got years and years experience, starting back with Big Brother, 15 years ago. And so looking at that, it has such a strong identity. It's loud. It's like walking into heaven. I would, with this constant conversation about tone and guidance, but I'm like, I don't want heaven at 3 a.m. I want heaven at midnight. So just before it gets all a bit messy. Mm-hmm. And so it's already there. It's there in the pinks and the purples. And the identity of that comes, drag culture and the whole sort of competing. It comes from ballroom culture in New York in the 70s. So it's actually all of those elements have been turned into a television format. The lipstick on the wall, the category is, they're all from, if you've watched Pose, it's a TV series based on that. That's what it's from. So it's making sure you're all taking an idea and not just putting a normal format on it, I would say. Don't put it on a coat hanger, just look at it. And then there is a slight departure on the UK one from the US series, where we add, well, there's no commercial stuff, but that's fine. It's BBC, We added things like the repeater badge. It's kitsch. It's ridiculous. That's what BBC's all about. We have a moment where it's called Untucked. Think about it in a visual way, with drag queens. But they sit there and they dissect what's going on. It doesn't happen on the US series, but it's very British because it kind of allows the underdogs to chat. They kind of get a chance to tell their stories. So I don't know if I've answered this.
You have. In fact, I'm going to actually segue slightly because actually it's making me think about Jocelyn, and I only discovered this as part of the research. I didn't realise. I always thought Fraggle Rock was British because there was at the top a different, the captain, wasn't it? Right, whereas that's not the case all over the world, and I only just found this out this week. And in terms of having that identity, can you tell us a bit more about the process that comes into play when it comes to children's TV, and especially Fraggle Rock really was groundbreaking in many ways.
It was all because Jim Henson had done the Muppet Show. So the people that were working, and there have been people that had also tried to do Sesame Street internationally and discovered how difficult it was, okay? So Jim had this opportunity, had this international audience, and the opportunity presented to him was, you could do an international show for kids where you produce the Muppet bit in the middle that can be dubbed easily, but then in local audiences would do their own little bit, bookending it. So it was Doc and Sprocket in the United States. It was Fulton Mackay and the Lighthouse, and John Gordon Sinclair played him here. There was a baker in France, whatever. The idea was the Fraggle Hole could open up into any, that they could be around the world. So that was it was almost like a business idea because he had this unique ability to pull that together. And what was so interesting about working with him then is and we called it the International Children's Show for ages, and it wasn't like having to pull together all the different, all the money from a different place, all that's so difficult. It was sort of there. And now I forgot what and Jim takes that idea of an international children's show, and that's when he's the guy who goes, all right, we're going to reach children around the world, so let's make a show about stopping war. That, to me, was really what made it soar. It wasn't just another show about 5 lovely characters that have adventures. It had this whole organizing principle around it.
I'm going to sort of stick with that for a moment because I actually think this is quite interesting for the audience because it was shocking for me to hear. You talked about the war element and stopping war. So what is the link between Fraggle Rock and the end of the Cold War? Like what came up? Well,
I can tell you what it means that helping stop war. When people say this, yeah, but it didn't work, did it? And I have to say, well, how do you know? We could have been blown up years ago. Honestly, no, it was that idea. The writers would sit in a room and we'd go, okay, what makes war? Okay, so it's differences, people not understanding each other, people not seeing each other, this idea of other, all the things. We'd sort of go through all that, and that ultimately that turned into, this is what I was talking about with Story Vehicle. I find this so exciting. Also working with people that are collaborating, that's really important. So we had the Gorgs who were the giants, we had Fraggles in the middle, and the little Doozers who were the little workaholics. But the audience could see that they were all connected, but the characters couldn't. So that gave us it was really interesting to play with that. And it turned out, it's been evolving, it's still evolving, because Apple TV, God bless them, we did 1 season, and we have another season about to come out, or coming out, we're working on it. But so it was the idea of stopping war, just informing all of your creative decisions.
But it was also the first show after the end of the Soviet Union. Am I making? No, it was the first show.
So there were all sorts of firsts like that. It went into interesting places. Yeah, but not enough people did their own bookends. Not enough countries did. That would have been nice if more had, because they've just found it easier to just dub one of the other versions, but hey, I'm not complaining. It went all over and the idea that 40 years later we're working on it again. And I can't tell you how sort of satisfying that's been. I've got the job of being essence checker. I've been trying to get the Writers Guild to make that a real title. So far, it's not working.
We'll keep pushing.
Thank you.
But bouncing off the back of the evolving element, actually. So, Jamie, I want to come to you because you've made tech stories that aren't just for tech geeks, but actually ones that are seeping into popular culture that people are talking about, not in, I hate this word silos, but in silos, in isolation. With the Missing Cryptoqueen, with what you're working on, it's still an active case. How did it evolve as you worked on it? And how did you sort of factor that into play? That it wasn't just, here is a product, bye, see you later. That you had to keep sort of, figuring things out as you had to go along, I guess. Yeah,
well, a couple of things. I really want to just stress this one thing. When you're doing these sort of factual entertainment shows, the entertainment bit, you can basically boil down what amounts to hundreds of hours of work, detailed research into a few lines. And people listening might think it was just a few minutes' work. But it really makes a difference if you've got all these hours behind it in the hinterland sitting there, because I can't explain how, but it gives a certain weight to it when you're describing it or talking about it. You have a confidence behind your words when you've got all this detailed work sitting underneath it that maybe the listener never hears. And I've never really worked out why that is, but maybe it's you feel confident in what you're saying. And when I then go to talk to academics or give lectures about the work, I get into the detail of it, and they realize there's that sort of body of work behind it, and it makes such a big difference. And it's so important in this kind of factual journalism that's entertaining, that it isn't just the entertaining bit you've done everything beneath it as well. But with the Missing Cryptoqueen, part of the thinking was we want to make it different to This American Life and all these really successful American podcasts, because I mean, I really like them, but I was getting a bit bored of them. And they were like Serial and Caliphate and all of those ones, they had their own identity, and I felt like if we just tried to copy that, it wouldn't work. So what can we do slightly differently? And because it was an active case of a missing person, we thought, let's be a bit risky and thank BBC Sounds for actually commissioning it and say, we will release an episode a week, but we won't know what's going to be in the next episode at the beginning of each week. But we're just going to have to commit to this. We'll do a lot of the work, the best we can, but we'll leave at least half of each episode open every week as we go, and we'll respond to people who phone in, give us tips, and so the story's evolving. And it was really hard. I mean, really, really long hours, as you can imagine. Ed Poll and Legal are on it until the last minute, and there's all these issues. But I think it made it just slightly, it felt differently to people. And it was a little bit unusual and novel. And part of that, I think, was that listeners kind of knew that they didn't know how the story was going to end, and we didn't either. You know, when you listen to a series and you know that the people making it, it's all finished, it's been wrapped up in post-production 6 months ago, and the kind of excitement of what happens in the next episode is a bit lost because you know they know already. You can probably go online and find it out, but you didn't with this story. So that, I think, just was partly a decision to make it feel different to other podcasts, but partly it was a perfect story to do that. And there were moments where, there was one episode actually where we just missed the deadline. I mean, we literally couldn't get it finished. So we thought, how do we make this exciting? So we put out like a 30-second one saying, we're at the airport, like, it's gonna be finished tomorrow, keep listening. That was like downloaded more than any other one. It like really, people got so excited about that, and it was trying to find a way of, taking advantage almost of, I suppose, it being this live investigation. It's a bit weird when people listen to it now because people binge listen, and so some of that excitement, I think, is lost listening 2 years later. But at the time, it was it really worked. Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. I think we're going to take some audience questions. I'm sure that they're eager to ask away. I mean, I have many, but let's go with the audience. Has anyone got questions? Just said you're all eager. Come on. Oh, go ahead. In the front.
Hi, I'm Amina Khan. I'm the founder of Cinecon. My question is, if potentially to all of you, if there's one thing you would want to do differently now, where you are in your career, than say 10 years ago, when we don't have the kind of knowledge or social media access and information that we do today, what would you tell people like us what not to do or to do?
Actually, I'm going to jump in on that, bearing in mind who came before you in the session before. Like, we really want the top tips for our emerging leaders too, so very important question. Dan, you sighed, so you're in it.
No, it's because it's something that I'm still thinking.
Okay, we'll come back to Dan. Ruby, pressures on you.
I think believe in yourself and follow your gut instinct. There's been a few instances when a zillion years ago, when I walked into a newsroom in Doc Martens and an oversized cardigan, I did stand out a fair bit. And then when I spoke with my big northern tones, I was laughed at a bit. And I thought, oh God, I'm going to have to go back, and my hair was sorted out, and I kind of wore a pink jacket for a short while. And then, I was just like, now, X years later, I celebrate who I am. It makes me laugh when someone comes and asks me where the commissioning editor is sitting, or where,
I have something so similar.
Yeah, exactly. And but it warms my soul when I do briefings to contributors, and then I can see, I get the ethnic nod because they'll be super surprised that someone like me is the com-ed, and they'll come over and let me know. And now, 20 odd years later, I'm all right with who I am, and I celebrate that. And that's what all my mentees, I'll say to them, my understanding of life has informed my program making, and I've not tried to change that. But there was a time where, you come up against walls all the time, and it's hard I was saying this earlier to a colleague, to navigate between the chippy and ownership. Sometimes it's chippy, sometimes it's passive. You don't know where that is, but you know, that's all I would say. Dan?
Yeah, no, so now you inspired me so much right now. I was just thinking that is something that I agree completely. But we are all content creators. We are all entertainers. But we are also selling our product. We are always, you know, trying to find. We have this separation that it's almost impossible to separate our mission to our, you know, financial goals and the things just to keep going. So don't trust people who say this doesn't sell.
Yeah.
Don't trust people who say this is not going to work. If you talk to them more deeply, you're going to see that they never did any hit. They just think they know. So the only person who knows what you're going to do in detail is yourself, nobody else. And all the big hits that came and they became, you know, culture defining, they did not come from a trend. They come from somebody saying, yeah, this might not sell, but I'm going to do it anyway.
I'm getting that on a t-shirt too. Jocelyn, how about you?
It's a hard question to answer because I'm in my third act of my career. And I can say, I love that. And I can say what I'm glad I did. I'm glad that I focused on, I mean, you know, people used to say, why? Don't you want to get out of kids' TV? No. Yeah, I'm glad that I focused and did the kind of kept believing that you could change the world with screen-based media. And I just, it's like what everybody else is saying, just believing in what you're doing. And now it's just really nice not to care about a lot of things, but you have to care about them when you're still in your first and second acts. And then when you get to be as old as me, you can go, I don't give a shit. and it's really quite liberating. So look forward to that.
I wish I realised 10 years ago that most people don't actually know what they're doing, and I really thought they did. But I think there's a serious point behind that, which is I really worked hard to develop a technical specialism in social media analysis that nobody understood at the time. And it wasn't really that difficult, but it meant I could go to much more senior people and they had no idea what I was talking about. And I could sort of use that to give them something valuable. But it opened loads of doors to me. And the other thing is, I'm so glad, I always tried to stay credible. I never tried to screw anyone over with the journalism I did. And now when I approach people, what I notice is everybody checks your back catalogue. We wouldn't have made the Missing Cryptoqueen had it not been for the fact that one of the key contributors went back through everything I'd written and realised I'd taken quite a reasonable tone with cryptocurrencies generally and never screwed anyone over, and so they were willing to talk to me. And it's so important because you write a stupid blog post because you'll get a few retweets. In 10 years you won't get the amazing story because no one will talk to you. And the final thing is you have a small window, I've learned, where you're like the hot thing where everyone wants to talk to you because you've just released something that's great, and you've got to like smash the door down at that moment because you're forgotten about in the next year because it's someone else's turn. So you have these like little windows where you can really take advantage. You've got to work like crazy to get through at that moment, and you've got to kind of know when that moment is.
Fantastic. Yeah. Any more questions? Otherwise I'm ready. Oh, go ahead.
First of all, just amazing to see so many like different people who clearly are all working on a similar issue but through different media. And kind of on that topic, I guess specifically for Jocelyn, but will apply to all of you. Obviously Fraggle Rock, when it originally aired, was very much public service broadcasting with the intention of being public service broadcasting and was publicly accessible. Now Fraggle Rock has now been kind of recommissioned, but it's behind a paywall. The ways that we disseminate media have shifted drastically over the last decade, 2 decades if we really want to. But how has that influenced and impacted the way that you think about the social impact that the media you're producing might have? And how can we optimize what we're doing to kind of impact the audiences we care about when that audience isn't necessarily as easily captivated because they're having to pay for content or not necessarily occupying the spaces that we're communicating in?
You want me to say something about
Yes,
actually, I'm the wrong person in a way because I concentrate entirely on making the content. And there are other people out there that I work with or that are associated that know much better about how to get it out there. I just want to feel that whatever's getting out there is the best possible thing, and I never waver from the belief that it can make an influence. And that's all I can, because I am really pants at social media personally. And I mean, I'm just in the wrong. I came up after all that, and so, yeah. Well, you know, other than people's mothers who are tech savvy and all that, I'm not untech. Actually, I was one of the first people in this country on the internet in 1980. 1980, we were communicating in the United States via telecom gold and dial. Anyway, so yeah, so I'm not a complete, you know, but that's never been how to get it out there. Has never been my interest. It's much more what am I trying to get out there. Does that make it? I'm sorry, I didn't really answer your question, did I?
Also, has it reshaped actually the content that you're making itself, what you're writing?
Well, no, what's interesting is that Apple is asking for, wants even bigger social issues than we did on the, you know, they were naturally part of the regular one. That's what they're interested in. And that's why they picked up the series, I think, is because you can tell big stories about, oh, I don't know, consent, for instance, was one of the stories that we did in the first series. But you make it fraggly, and it's goofy, and it doesn't, you know, but the message is there. So Apple's been actually great.
Can I quickly say, like, I suppose one of my biggest worries at the moment, I don't have an answer for it, is the possibility that journalists start writing stories for Netflix or for, you know, the sort of the risk of prioritizing the entertainment element because a streaming platform will buy a good story. So you write it with that in mind, and that starts affecting the quality of the journalism or the way that you tell the story. So you emphasize certain pivot points in the plot or you hold things back. And I haven't figured out the long-term effect of this or what it means. Every now and again I speak to a journalist who said, I tried to contact someone, but they wouldn't speak to me because they've already signed a deal with some streaming platform. And it's a worry because financially journalists can't compete really. So I think there's going to be a really important onus that some of these streaming platforms might be the first to break big stories that are normally traditionally journalistic stories, and they will have a responsibility, sort of a journalistic responsibility to tell them in a certain way. So it's an emerging problem. I don't have an answer to it, but it's something that I'm sort of slightly worried about.
It's been an ongoing problem in kids' TV always.
I know.
You make the thing for the platform.
I'm just going to ask for final thoughts, just so that we can depart. But Ruby, what's your sort of take on that? And then Dan, and then...
Yeah, I was just going to say, so of course, you know, I'm a public service broadcaster, but the social media engagement on Drag Race when it goes out weekly is in its millions on a Thursday night. So I don't want to get to the place where I'm making this show thinking what they're going to say on social, but it's there, you know, and that's changed. There was, you know, we weren't, you know, it's, you want them to engage. And so when we talked about buying Drag Race, they, and, you know, how we're going to do it, I wanted to do a weekly drop. And there's absolutely no way we could do that on a platform. You know, no one's going to come and watch it week to week. It's like, they will, because there's a will there. And by doing so, we've created this social event, as it were, but on social, on a Thursday night. So I think it's there now as part of the program making process. And sometimes I'm watching something and I'm like, yeah, can we just have that soundbite in Vision because that's going to make the GIF or that's the iconic moment, you know. So it is slightly changed in the fact that social is informing production and production. But I would hope that it's always, like you said, I'm making the best product I possibly can. And hopefully, you know, broadcasters are going off and there's huge people saying, well, do you know what sells? Celebrities sell. I'm like, yes, I know, thank you. Get celebrity judges to say something. You know, there's loads of departments doing that. And we've got some market research. So just stick to your gut instinct and make the best product I can. I'm recognising that there's a huge social interest in it and engagement in it. Let's just, you know, and I'm just trying to deliver on that. And it's great if people are commenting, you know. I see it as a critique, not a critic, not criticism. most of the time.
And Dan, just if I can give you 60 seconds.
Oh my God.
That's how we roll. I've learned from you.
I'll say that I wish one day I'm going to be in this position like Jocelyn with this so much experience and so much living and producing. Now, Playtra is a small studio in, dropped in this mainstream of information and concerns about money and what sells or what doesn't. I wish one day I'm going to be able to say, I just want to create the product, but right now I have to keep looking at trends because there's so much out there. And I will lie if I say I don't resent that, because I think this is going to sound so hammy, so sorry for that. But we are the bards of our age. We are the people who are going to be, referenced in the future of taking a picture of our society and our culture. And I would like to be able to do this without thinking how many copies I'm going to sell.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for this whole session. Thank you.
Dhruti.